Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks for joining us here today. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Actually looking forward to this.
This
I
is
feel like we've got the right group in place to help us discuss and even resolve some things.
yes, and do a lot of learning. Today's program to our audience, we're going to be continuing our Stand Up and Sound Off series. And today's topic is a very challenging topic, very timely topic. Race and industry, kind of where we are and where we're going. And we have a couple of outstanding panelists and really friends of the show that are going to be sharing their perspective and their experiences. And then to our audience, we want to hear from you. This whole program, this Stand Up and Sound Off series was really built to hear from our audience as much as the program hears from us and our panelists. So we want it to be really interactive. We want to make this really a powerful learning opportunity and really make it a information and idea exchange. So that's kind of our aim, right, Greg?
Yeah. I think, the key here is to get everyone together and put it all on the table and talk it through.
Yeah.
Right. We need to do more of that anyway.
Great. Well said, as usual. So I'm looking forward to today, selfishly, really looking forward to today's conversation. Two quick program notes before we get started here today. So first off, big thanks to our sponsor that helps make this type of programming happen, Source Connect. In fact, their generosity has allowed us to provide a micro grant to Morgan State University's, their APIC student chapter. They've got an outstanding supply chain program on the move at Morgan State, and our sponsor has allowed us to help support that programming. And Greg, as we've talked about, as we're excited about, we've got a team member, Genoa Smith, who is the incoming president of the APIC student chapter at the university.
Yeah. Genoa, we got to share with her father and with her. We shared it with her father first, that Kevin and David and the group at Source Connect were sharing this grant with the Apex chapter at Morgan State, and she was really excited.
We were too.
Right? It's a good way to make a young woman cry, I think. So,
well,
I mean, you could see the wheels spinning, and they know what to do with these funds to improve their programs, which are already very strong.
Yeah. Okay. So at the end of today's session, we're going to hear from Kevin L. Jackson, COO over at Source Connect for a couple minutes. We'll learn a lot more about what they're doing there, really innovating part of the business world. Secondly, if you enjoy our webinar today, if you enjoy the discussion and learn from the discussion, we'd invite you to check out our podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Okay, so let's tackle, Greg, the ground rules before we introduce our outstanding speakers here today. So if we could flip to that second slide there. So it's pretty simple. All attendees are going to be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. We are recording this session, both the video and audio, and we'll be publishing that after the fact. But we want to make it, without all that said, we want to make it as interactive as possible. So join in the conversation. You can do that two ways. So we'll have dedicated pauses in the conversation to welcome our audience's comments, their questions, their observations, you name it. So when we hit those 15, 20-minute segments, you can either shoot your question or your comment in via the text box, via GoToWebinar, that toolbox, or if you've got a great microphone or even a good microphone and a steady internet connection, you can click on raise your hand and we'll try to recognize you and unmute you so you can share or ask your question, contribute verbally. So it gets a little bit tricky there, but really our aim is to really just help facilitate what's going to be, I think, a really compelling conversation here today and let folks engage however they can engage. So as I mentioned there, that third ground rule, the recording of the session will be made available to all the registrants, and then we'll publish it publicly in the days that follow. Greg, is all that clear as mud, maybe?
I think that these are the same rules that people have probably been living by since March 13th is my guess. So we're in a go-to world or a Zoom world, depending on where you land, right?
That's right. And on that note, hey, you never know what will take place on a live event like this as we're all, broadcasting from our home offices. So, but undoubtedly, the discussion and the idea exchange is going to be an exceptional experience here today. So, with that said, one quick, we also should mention before we introduce our speakers, Tandria Bellamy, who is going to be the third panelist here today. You may have seen that in some of our promotion of today's conversation. She's got a family member that will be attending college, and their remote, several hours long orientation session was moved to today.
Right.
And of course, as we all would as parents, we got to be there for that. So she unfortunately won't be a part of the event today, but you'll see her again really soon on Supply Chain Now. She's always a wonderful contributor. Okay, so Greg, why don't you lead off and introduce our first speaker?
Yeah. So our first panelist is DC Mons Sfregala. DC has, there she is. Hey, DC. She has embraced a variety of roles over the last 10 years, but she considers one of her most important to be a problem solver. The status quo is not the status with DC. I can assure you of that. So she's really found her calling in process improvement and in an area where we both have some passion: sales and operations planning, inventory management, change management, and user adoption of the digital tools and collaboration environments that really make that happen. She's lived and worked around the world, but as she was finishing her Spanish degree, she was recognized as BET's Black Girls Rock as a mad girl that is making a difference, right? I've never seen DC mad, but I'm pretty sure mad is an acronym for something.
I'll
Look,
have Joseph record next time.
Say that again?
I'll have Joseph record next time if you want to see.
Yes, you wouldn't want to see me when I'm angry, right? Look, we've seen DC making changes happen ever since she hit our radar, making a difference, especially sharing her experience and her expertise with the community, with her family, who we've already met. And she joined us for a live stream about a month ago, right, where we talked about digital and business transformation. And it was, I don't know, all I know is that Scott took about 15 pages of notes. He holds a master's degree in engineering management from Kennesaw State University and serves as an Anaplan consultant for Akili, a leading business management and technology consulting firm. So, welcome, DC. Good afternoon here where we are. So, great to have you with us.
Yes, I'm super excited to be here. I think I always say that, super excited, but I am. I'm excited.
we are too, and I'm so glad you're here
right now.
That's right. And you're joined as super fans we are of DC. We're also super fans of our second panelist that's here with us here today, and I'm gonna introduce David Burton, President and founder of the Diverse Manufacturing and Supply Chain Alliance, commonly referred to, you might hear us call it DMSCA, which is a great way of as you're talking about a powerful organization. So you don't have to say all the words each and every time, but DMSCA is an outstanding organization. We'll talk more about that here momentarily. David is a native of Columbia, South Carolina, a graduate of Morgan State University. He is a decorated Vietnam veteran, having served as an officer in the U.S. Army. David sits on a variety of boards. He's regularly sought after for his expertise and his experience and his opinion in a variety of business topics. He serves as an adjunct professor at Howard University and was recognized not too long ago as the Frank E. Parker Client of the Year for his courage and perseverance. And anyone that knows David Burton, I've had the pleasure of at least knowing him for 6-7 months. You know that he's got those qualities in spades. In fact, I was introduced to David by a good friend of the show, Daniel Stanton, and I was able to attend. We were, in some way, shape, or form, able to attend a DMSCA event in Arizona in February. And I was a newbie at the event. It was my first DMSCA event, and it was outstanding. We had probably 11 or 12 really incredible interviews with a lot of the participants and the keynotes, and quickly we became big fans. So if you want to check out the organization, DMSCA.us, DMSCA.us, check it out. And with no further ado, good afternoon, David. How you doing?
Thank you, Scott. Great to be back with you.
Absolutely. Great to have you back. We enjoyed your interview with us also probably 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was really great.
Well, out in Arizona, David was he's like the governor out there, so we couldn't steal an hour of his time out there. We had to wait till we all got back home and really enjoyed that. All right, so Greg, before we DC shares some of her perspective, let's kind of share the format with today's audience. How's that?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, so again, our aim is very simple. We want to help provide for an outstanding learning opportunity, a compelling discussion. We're all looking, hopefully, with open minds and open eyes and open ears, ways that we can fill in some of the gaps we have in our perspective here today. So up first, so when we think about the format for what should be a really interactive event, up first, we're going to hear both from DC and David as they both share their perspective, and it probably will be varied. They may touch on some of their journey and some of their experiences there, and they may also touch on some of the change that leaders need to be aware of and ways that we can help. We're going to follow each of their segments, Greg, with an opportunity and really let's call it an expectation for our audience to chime in, and whether you want to ask a question of DC or David or anyone, or if you want to share an observation, please do it. We have come to expect that. We've got a very engaged audience, very sharp, smart audience, and we're looking forward to not only hearing from DC and David, but also our audience. So Greg, is that a pretty fair assessment, or did I screw something up?
No, that's pretty good. I think you've outlined it pretty well. So let's let them sound off.
Absolutely. So with that said, DC, we'd love for you to kind of start things off for us.
Yes, absolutely. So I am going to do my best not to ramble, to be succinct, and to stay within my 15-minute time limit. I can see all of your guys' screens, so if you have a little note, 1 minute, 30 seconds, cut it off. Then I'll definitely be watching and kind of watching the time also. But I'm very glad that you guys have set this up. And Greg and Scott, we talked a little bit before, also just preparing for this, and it's kind of kismet at the time that this conversation was actually scheduled to happen on this day, because I think that back weeks ago when you guys first scheduled everything, there hadn't yet been this big push of diversity and the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, to where we were seeing so many companies talking about diversity inclusion measures and things like that. Of course, it's been on the radar for a couple of years now, the diversity and inclusion affinity groups and things like that at different organizations. But I think now in the more recent weeks is where we've really seen this push to have a candid conversation, a real conversation, and not just superficial measures of, all right, let's hire, we've got a team, and now we've got a person from this ethnic background, a person from this gender, and a person from this ethnic background, and we're good to go. So this is a very timely conversation. I will do my best not to kind of be the face of the race or the face of the gender, of course, and the interactive platform that we have here, I think, will also contribute to that. So if anyone does not agree, with anything that I'm saying, you guys have already said it, but I'm also hoping that, we can have a safe space for disagreement. I think that, part of the reason why we don't have as much diversity and inclusion as we should or can is because we don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations, especially in professional business environments where we want to save space, or we want to, you know, come off as being very confident and, you know, not always being right. Some people do have that desire, you know, to always be right, but, you know, having, I think Larry, someone I'm connected with on LinkedIn, I read yesterday or maybe the day before, that we need to look for the misfits more than the fits, you know, that cultural fit. And I use that to say that I hope that people will engage in healthy conflict and healthy disagreement so that we can, you know, continue to move forward. So my experience, I think, has been a mix of what other women of color have experienced in the supply chain space, especially being in the tech space. So I don't think you guys mentioned in the original introduction that you did, Greg. So I have been in the digital transformation, cloud-based technology tech space as far as it relates to S&OP and supply chain. So my passion and kind of, you know, really soft spot for process management and people management grew out of being in the tech space and seeing these technology implementations and things like that. So not only is supply chain very white male dominated, but tech in general is also very white male dominated. So walking into a room to where I am the only woman or the only person of color is not new. So it's definitely a weird position to be in, and it is not something that I just kind of, you know, I don't really know how we say it in English. In Italian, it translates to you just kind of feel it on your skin. I guess maybe like a gut feeling that something is kind of weird here, but there's actually like sociological and psychological studies on the idea of intersectionality. So a lot of companies are, and I've been hearing it a lot lately in terms of diversity, is that, oh yeah, well, we've got 30% women on our board or in senior leadership, or we've got ethnic diversity of whatever percentage versus last year, which is, you know, this new, we've seen a 4% increase, a 5% increase. So we're doing great in our diversity numbers. And even when it comes to studies from like McKinsey or SWE, which I'm so glad they're doing those studies, there's still this kind of very surface level review of where do women of color sit. So that intersection of gender and race. So as of 2015, there were studies that found that no company was really excelling at gender and racial diversity. So that then leaves women of color in a very weird spot. So what some people may or may not know is back in the 70s, there was a discrimination lawsuit against General Motors, and the plaintiffs were women of color. And the court found in favor of General Motors because there was no evidence of discrimination against women, and there was no evidence of discrimination against Black men. So since there was no evidence on either side, then the court found, well, it's not possible there's discrimination against women of color because it's not women nor, you know, men of color. But it's a very different experience. And the biases that are these subconscious biases that we all have come to know about. And I think, and I would hope that people at this point, we can all agree, we know that diversity is important. We all know that there are subconscious biases, there are hiring biases, there are resume biases, like we all know it's there. What we're doing about them is one thing, but I would really hope at this point that no one is saying, no, there's no reason why DC doesn't put Lardicia on a resume. There's no reason why she wakes up every morning before the first day of a new job and think, oh my goodness, is this hairstyle okay? You know, or if I walk into a meeting, or if I have a feedback, a review, or if I have, a conversation, and I recognize, and everyone recognizes, that I am brilliant. I show up. I do what I need to do. Clients love me. So if the only excuse that, or the justification, I shouldn't call it an excuse, the justification that I get for not getting a promotion or not getting a raise is that, well, other people would be upset. So at that point, you're always having a self-reflection of, would that conversation be the same if I were not even a white man, if I were a white woman, if I were not a Black woman, or even if I were a Black man, would that conversation be different? So it's a very weird position to be in as a woman of color, and it is something that we definitely need to be more cognizant about. I have started to see companies, and I'm hoping that, we're 2020 and 2022, 2024, maybe over the next few years, there are more companies that will start to really follow the different recommendations. I've read some Harvard Business Review articles. Project Include is a great organization that's working with companies to create a framework and kind of roadmap for their diversity inclusion efforts. But really disaggregating, pay data, or disaggregating data in general, and seeing where those experiences of that intersection of women of color really sit, what their sentiments are, because kind of going back to those numbers of, oh, we've got 30% women and we've got, 40% not, white. So whether it's Latin or Asian or, Black, African American, whatever, that ethnic diversity is, well, even going a step further, what are your inclusion efforts looking like? Because what we see, and I shouldn't say what we see, what I am seeing a lot of right now that's making me very hopeful for a future is that when I completed my master's, when I was studying, industrial engineering, I don't know if it was, the particular school I went to, it's very possible that different universities attract a different type of student, but in my courses, there were a few courses where, I was the only girl, or I was the only person of color. But for the most part, I would say overall, in the degree, if I take all of the courses that I took that were engineering related or supply chain related, I was very surprised to see, based off of all the statistics that I've seen, the number of women of color that were in these courses. So I say that to say that if we look at the, leadership makeup when it comes to supply chain or when it comes to STEM in general, it's not because there is a lack of interest. So at some point, we get people of color, women of color specifically, into STEM studies. We might even get them into internships, and then just slowly but surely we see that they start, the presence starts to decline. So as we get into leadership and things like that. So a lot of studies have found that that is because, women miss that first critical manager promotion, and they don't get the opportunity then to go from manager to senior manager to director, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to spend time going through all statistics and findings, but that is something that is related directly, I think, to inclusion. So you hired the person, but then what did you do within your company once they were on the team to make them feel included and to make them feel like they belonged? So what I think that a lot of us might be feeling as women of color is this, again, kind of superficial approach to diversity efforts. So companies are doing it for the sake of numbers and not for the sake of truly changing their culture, because again, that is uncomfortable. That then means that my day-to-day in a meeting is likely going to be, DC. If she does agree with me, great. But if she doesn't agree with me, I know she's going to vocalize it. And I know I'm going to then have my ideas challenged, which is good. It's good to have ideas challenged, but it's uncomfortable, and nobody wants to be uncomfortable. You have to make it a conscious effort to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. And that's just human nature. That's nothing that we are faulting. I don't personally fault people for it. I don't, say that people are racist or they're prejudiced or they're biased because they want to be around people that look like them. It's literally human nature.
Right.
So I applaud the companies recently that have, put out their statements of what they are going to do. I have seen a couple of companies post diversity and inclusion officer roles. So that's a good first step. But I'd really like to see again in a couple of years what those statistics look like, how many companies actually followed through with it. And that's because, and I liken it to, that digital transformation, business transformation. It's not just like, okay, we have a diversity inclusion officer, we're good to go, yay. Right. It really takes a transformation from the top down. And it really takes senior leaders, when I say senior, I'm saying C-suite leaders, to, the mission and values, the organization code of conduct. What are we going to do as a company to ensure that all employees feel included, and to ensure that we are going to achieve, exceptional financial performance because we are open to healthy conflict and open to healthy disagreements, because that's how we know the best ideas are going to grow out of that. And I'm trying to watch the clock, and I did not expect to talk that long.
That's okay. Hey,
but
there's a lot more there, right? I mean, there's
a lot there, and I try, like I said, I don't want to be a talking head and like talk statistics, things like that. Companies are putting out the statistics all the time. We know it's there. So at this point, what's the gap? And the gap is really from diversity to inclusion, and then getting that disaggregation of data and getting more research on that intersectionality of race and gender. And not just, okay, here's some gender diversity, here's some racial diversity, because it really leaves, Asian women, Latino women, Black women, it really leaves us in this kind of, it's almost weird to speak up, because, someone's, oh, like, we've got so much diversity, we've got 30% women and like no Black women. So if we're, kind of going back to representation matters, as a Black woman, you don't see someone that looks like you. So then it really makes you question, is this a field where I will be able to be successful? Whereas if I see Black women excelling in other fields, I might choose, maybe I'll go elsewhere. So I cannot think of off the top of my head more than 3 Black women in senior leadership roles in supply chain.
And that's got to change. As we all know here, we've got to figure out what are and one thing, if I can just weigh in here, because we want to open it up for this first Q&A session to our audience. Quick heads up, we welcome your comments and your questions here momentarily, but really quick, again, I'm a big note taker at DC. You shared so much in 17 minutes time, but one of the things I heard you say that I think is really important is there's enough first steps. We need to be seeing second and third and fourth and advanced steps, right? A lot of companies are saying, hey, we're doing this as that first step, but we've got to see more results, and that's why these conversations that for some of us, and I'm pointing to myself, it's tough to work through because you're watching syllables or watching everything we say because we don't want to say the wrong thing, but we got to have them. We got to be uncomfortable. That's another thing you said there, DC. Okay, so enough of my thoughts. Let's hear from the audience, Greg and
Enough of
DC.
my thoughts too.
Yes, that's right. DC, what a great leadoff hitter. I mean, you're setting a high bar, and I can say that because I know David.
Yeah.
David's up for the challenge.
He's a great cleanup hitter.
Yes. Okay. So to our
Thank you,
so let me open up the window here. We've had
Hey,
10.
while you do that, can I just share a couple thoughts here?
Sure.
I know we're supposed to facilitate, but DC, a couple things, you said a lot there, but a couple things really stood out at me. And one is that companies need to think past the threshold. They need to think past getting diversity groups into and on the roster, right? They need to figure out what position they play and how to advance and enable them to be comfortable and excel in that environment. And the other thing that you said is that starts at the C level. That is absolutely critical. That sort of thing has to start with the recognition that you also identified. And to me, you have reached the threshold as an organization when you value diversity for the value that diversity groups and people can bring,
Yep.
rather than doing it, as you said, just to check the box, right?
Well put.
You really have to live a value that says everyone is valuable, and more of those voices, as you're talking about,
Yep.
are valuable to us, and we're valuable to them. So I hope
All
that
right.
helped you get to the question, Scott.
Thank you very much. You're reading my mind, Greg. Okay, so we've got a couple submittals here, and y'all bear with me. And again, audience, you can raise your hand if you've got a good internet connection, a good microphone, and we can hear you share your observation. So Elba Preha Gallagher is part of our audience here today. We love not only Elba and her perspective, but also her nonprofit, ShowMe50.org. So Elba, loved your comment, look for Misfits. And I think, DC, you referenced Larry
Leon.
Leon.
Yeah.
Yes, but regardless, love that. And Elba did too. Also, Elba shares that. So she's stealing that look for Misfits, by the way. Companies really need to start being the barrier breakers and really aim to be disruptive leaders in addressing issues of diversity. I think if public pressure is the only factor that pushes companies to change their inclusive culture, then there's definitely a lot wrong with their strategies. Let's see. I'm attributing this to the wrong person. This is Memory Mathema. My apologies. Elba said she's stealing love your Misfits. Memory is talking about how these are some wrong strategies. She continues to say, workplaces are still the most unsafe environment to voice one's opinion about matters of inclusion. It's classified as being confrontational as opposed to enabling people to take those uncomfortable discussions as opportunities for personal growth.
I'd like to pipe in there.
Sure.
And Memory and I talk kind of regularly, so I'm sure we'll continue this conversation also later. But as kind of just as a point for women of color that are watching and who will watch later, as it's recorded, I have lived in that confrontational space. So what Memory was saying, there's still this view that in the workplace, if you don't agree, it's confrontation. And I say be confrontational. I am sure that I can think of a couple of men right now that think I am confrontational. But one thing that I have decided is that if the companies don't want to do it, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to fight for it. I take up space. I don't take BS. If you have something to say to me that is ridiculous, I will tell you it's ridiculous. And I'm not going to say, thank you very much, and then behind your back, talk. No, I'm going to tell you that doesn't make sense. What you're saying is ridiculous. and I don't agree with it. We don't have to be friends.
Right.
We have to be professional. We have to be cordial. My mother raised me, and I had expectations set from very early on that everyone will not like me. There is nothing you can do to make every single person you meet like you.
Right.
And I am 100% okay with that. I think that women want to be likable because they don't want to have the bossy stereotype, or again, the confrontational stereotype, especially as a Black woman. There's the angry Black woman stereotype. And I am encouraging other women, even Latino women, there's the feisty Latina. I encourage men to be aware of that bias. I encourage White women to be aware of that bias when you're talking to women of color or when you're interacting with women of color. But I also encourage, Black women and Latino women, if that's what it takes, if you have to come off as the angry Black woman or the feisty Latina, take up this space, get your seat at the table and maintain your seat at the table. And I'm sure a couple of that, I can literally make a list right now of men that I know think I am an angry Black woman or I am confrontational because I did not allow them to say something about me or to me or around me that was unacceptable.
So, so much to dive into. Let's move to Nicole Williams. Nicole, we're going to try having you weigh in. I think you're unmuted now. So, Nicole, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We sure can. The floor is yours.
Perfect. So I can relate to so much that you're saying, DC. It's like you are me in another life. So here's my question. I am in an organization where it's supply chain, and it's predominantly African Americans that are the workers. However, the senior leaders are white males. So there are positions that come available when it's an opportunity for the senior leaders to hire an African American female or male. They choose to hire another person that looks like them. So I'm like you. I don't bite my tongue much. I'm pretty open and say kind of how I feel about things. And I'm saying to them, you need to put somebody else at the table that can bring a different perspective, not just somebody that looks like you and the answers are going to always be the same, especially considering the fact that 90% of the workers are African Americans. So I basically was told, this is kind of how it is, and you probably should find another job. I did apply for the senior leader position. I didn't get the senior leader position. It was given to another white male. And I was told that I got great leadership experience, which senior leaders probably should be leading, but not enough technical experience, which I was a technical warrant officer, so I have a lot of technical experience. So I think the bottom line is I'm too angry Black woman, quote unquote, for them, because I speak my mind and I don't go with what's wrong. I just go with what's right. So should I take the advice and move to a different organization, or should I continue to stay there and I guess hopefully one day they'll see my point and I'll be allowed to move up to a higher position?
Excellent question, Nicole. Thanks so much for participating. All right, so DC and David, if you could give very succinct lightning round. I hate to not give it justice, but we're going to dive into David's segment here momentarily. Give a 30-second or less answer to Nicole's question, if you would. And DC, let's start with you, and then David will move into your segment.
Yes, so I can definitely be quick. Nicole, I say leave, girl, leave, bye. But we can definitely talk about it offline. Find me on LinkedIn. I am definitely a proponent of leaving a company if they do not value you. You do not have to fight for someone to recognize that you are brilliant and that you're worth it. Obviously right now it's a strange time. You of course have to time everything out. You have to think about your at-home life, your salary, paying your bills, etc. But if you are in a position to leave, I say leave. They've already told you. You've already tried. You gave them a chance. fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, etc.
Yep.
Connect with me and we'll talk through it.
Outstanding. And we will be publishing the LinkedIn profiles for both DC and David. We encourage y'all to reach out and let's make some connections here. Okay, really quick before we move to David, big thanks to Elba and Memory for weighing in. Stefan, Christina, Sylvia, and Kevin will I'll be sharing your contributions in the second Q&A. We'll lead off with that. And David Burton, we're going to dive into your segment head first here. If you would weigh in really quick on Nicole's question from your perspective, and then please share and enlighten us with the rest of your experiences and insights here.
Well, to that question, I would just say never acknowledge your own ceiling. Like I agree with Dicey, leave. The longer you stay there, you are acknowledging your own ceiling that you can't break.
Well put, sir.
Okay.
All right. So the floor is yours.
Okay. This is interesting. Dicey, I enjoy what you said because I hear a lot of what I'm going to say externally because I took the route a long time ago of having 100% HR diversity inclusion by hiring myself. And I got there circuitously. I want to talk a little bit about that because I think all of my life has taken me to where I am now. And let me say that because after leaving Morgan State University, I went to the University of Pennsylvania and got my degree there and stayed in regional planning and came back from Vietnam, taught at Howard. But I got involved there in the DC area. After resigning my commission, I was like a 24-year-old regular Army major. And that's kind of fast because I was kind of on that regular track to be something bigger in the Army. But I had a calling that was inside, and that was to do something that was in the community. I started out working with New Towns. I got asked by Control Data Corporation back in the day when they were building small business incubators in depressed urban areas. And I was one of those guys that had real estate experience and everything they were looking for in a minority to help them move their agenda forward. And of course, Control Data is not an economic development company. It was at the time a mainframe computer company. At the time, the competition was just IBM, Cray, and the Japanese. Those were the three biggest. And maybe digital debt. But I got involved nationwide, helping Control Data find opportunities for utilizing small business incubators to change communities. That is, to create jobs inside of incubators that hire people from the community. Control Data was very much involved in a program back in the day called Plato. And it was a program that could take a person from one economic correction from one grade level to another in a very short period of time. And we used that to help persons in depressed communities increase their employability skills. So the big picture here is business and community, business and community. What was the role of business in helping to change communities? So I started my company, and I won't go through that long story, but I started focusing on utilizing small business incubators and small businesses themselves become change agents in communities. I started a minority manufacturing program with the South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and that program eventually went national. I came to the National Institute of Science and Technology in Washington, D.C., and the initiative there was to leverage federal resources to help develop more minority manufacturers across the country. Long story short, Procter & Gamble loved the model and essentially said, if you build it, we will come. So I started my own company. But it was prior to that, I had also been a consultant to major banks in terms of helping them with their disparity studies in terms of why they were not connecting more with diverse communities. So I helped some of the major banks in the country, some of which you know, look at themselves. And my first line in every report to them was that they were their own worst enemies in terms of how they were operating. And you can either be, you can understand that, or you can change how you're operating. And today, with the Diverse Manufacturing Supply Chain Alliance, my message is not that much different because, and DC, I love the phrase you use, supplier diversity and inclusion, because I think supplier diversity in the corporate world today has to change to supplier diversity and inclusion. One is a check the box activity, supplier diversity. Supplier diversity and inclusion is proactive. You do something to make it change. And that's the reason why DEMSCO exists, because what our mission is trying to help diverse suppliers become engaged in strategically sourced supply chains. Now, today, I see three big trends that puts minority manufacturers in double jeopardy. And let me explain why I'm saying that. We got in business, we, DEMSCO, our organization, our corporate members and our suppliers. And let me give a shout out to some of our big corporate members like Johnson & Johnson, Intel, and Abbott, McCormick, Cummins, and others. But our objective there is to help suppliers become engaged in their supply chains. But the challenge that we have is recognizing today the three things that, again, will put diverse suppliers in double jeopardy. Our initial challenge was hard enough, that is to develop suppliers and to be performance driven and performance managed, to have suppliers not compete as diverse suppliers, but as suppliers that just happen to be diverse and were the best in their class because they understand manufacturing, they understood supply chains. Now I see three things happening that will impact everybody. I say double jeopardy. So the first jeopardy, of course, is what we were doing essentially through the Diverse Manufacturing Supply Chain Alliance, helping suppliers to develop their strategies to get involved in supply chains. But here are the three big things. Number one, as large corporations adjust to I used to use the word post-COVID environment, but it could be just our COVID-19 environment because we don't know how long it's going to last. But resiliency is going to be their main business objective, to develop a supply base that is resilient and would not be as disruptive in the future as COVID-19 has in their current supply chain in terms of all the distribution lines and things that have been disrupted in the supply chain network. The second big trend here is what COVID-19 has done to their business agenda, and that is to accelerate their digitization. Because digitization is a way of preventing being caught short again in terms of not being resilient. So large corporations who themselves are not yet there, they would be moving expeditiously to digitize their supply chains. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. You hear it every day. Social organizations want to do something about social justice. But from my perspective, the best way to do that is to go back to the roots of what manufacturing is all about in the first place. That is to create jobs. The best way to pay tribute to George Floyd and others in the context of the social justice movement is to empower minority communities through economic development in terms of leveraging the power of the manufacturing to create jobs in those communities and to leverage diverse suppliers as agents of that. Because after all, let's look at it this way, up to 80% of the supply chain value is in the supply chain network, or AKA suppliers. So the focus on suppliers should be to leverage them as change agents in diverse communities to create jobs, to help develop the economic base and wealth in that community. The DEMSCO Supplier Development Foundation, which is a sister organization of the DEMSCO Diverse the Diverse Supply Chain Alliance is a 501c3 foundation specifically focused on enabling suppliers to implement strategies to do that very thing. And let me put this in some context. I require suppliers to have 5 strategies. Number 1, the unique supply chain strategy. You got to show them that you understand that you are in a supply chain and that you can manage and be managed in that supply chain. Number 2, table stakes stuff, cross-enterprise maturity, ISO, quality, financial management, all the stuff that you can't leave home without. Number 3, you got to have your carbon footprint, because everybody wants to know how you are impacting the environment. And if you don't know that, then corporations will less care about you because you are insensitive to something that's more and more important to them. The last 2 strategies, DEMSCA doesn't do: technology enablement and talent acquisition and workforce training. So my solution is to accelerate the digitalization of diverse suppliers, because if their customers are now going to accelerate their digitization at a time when they are not in the supply chain at a level where they should be anyway, what's going to happen to them if their customers now become more digitized? That's the double jeopardy I'm talking about. So the solution now is to accelerate that digitization and to help diverse suppliers become more digitized. And that's going to require investment of resources. And if you're really interested in supplier diversity and inclusion, you've got to be serious about helping diverse suppliers become more digitized. Because I tell suppliers every day, at every corporation, someone's waking up on Monday morning to fire you, and you better be the best of your supplier type. And if you're trying to get into a supply chain, your competition theoretically, unless you have some unique innovation, is already in the supply chain. So what is your business case for asking a customer to fire a legacy supplier and hire you? It had better be something about value. It cannot be, should not be about your gender or your race, because that would get you a conversation, but it won't keep you in the supply chain. So that's why we're so driven to work with diverse suppliers that are certified, certainly, but can bring value to their customer. And I think today that value is going to be more and more driven by a supplier's digitization at a time when their customers are accelerating their digitization, which means that if you work towards digitization at normal speed, you won't be around very long. And that's my message that I would like to get across.
Thank you. Thank you, David. All right, so both DC and David, they are like magnets. They're bringing a ton of comments and interaction from the audience. So let's get to some of these comments from, we'll start with Christina. And Christina was speaking more towards the earlier part of the conversation, but we're going to work down through. We've got a lot of passionate contributions here. So Christina says, Black women have so much power and leadership to offer companies. The position of diversity and inclusion is usually held by Black women who at times still have their leadership and strength hands tied to the instituted bias, measures, and ways of thinking. This must change for the advancement of Black women in general. Excellent commentary from Christina. Give DC and David a really quick chance to respond to that. Really quick so we can get to others. DC?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I see that that the diversity and inclusion role, I see it very often is a Black person. And that is another kind of box checker because it's also the idea that, okay, we've got a Black person. Well, what about Latinos? What about Asians? What about everyone else that isn't white? And then to, Christina's point, it's a figurehead. It's just to say that we did it, and that person has very little real power, and that power is sometimes just tied to, okay, what do the numbers look like, as opposed to, really driving that cultural change and that business change. So I don't have anything to say. I agree,
right.
Christine.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. DC, quick comment from you, David, on Christina's point.
On DC's point, ditto.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to, good stuff there, David. I'm going to read one more comment. Greg, I want to come back to you after I share this next comment because a big thrust that David was talking about earlier was digitization. And that covers so much, but we've talked earlier.
That's out there too. So let's circle back. Circle back.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I was thinking about how that ties DCU and David together.
Yes.
Right?
And in particular, we've talked about AI and some of the threat that poses to minorities progressing and advancing. So, all right. So bear with me one second before we get to that. So Kevin Thomas has got what programs are companies putting in place to train diverse candidates and give them the experience needed to fill these higher level roles? Companies use experience as a gauge for promotion, but rarely provide an avenue to gain that needed experience. Good stuff from Kevin. All right, so Greg, weigh in on that AI conversation we were having, and then real quick we'll hit DC and David and circle back to the comments from the audience.
Yeah, I think look, you have to have diversity in training and programming AI to begin with. Otherwise, we've seen scenarios where AI gets trained to think only men's shoes are shoes because all they show it is men's shoes, right? Or that only white men can be doctors, right? Or only females can be real estate agents or whatever. You have to have these diverse points of view. Look, I think of this, I don't think about this as programs. I think about this as principles. I think about it as core values. And I think what the programs, if that's what we have to call them, is programs, they need to reflect a core value among white leadership of trying to recognize everyone as having the same potential, regardless of their nationality, race, color, creed, sexual orientation, any of those things, right? That's really, really hard to accomplish, but I feel like we have an advantage because we're in this great generational transition where the people who are aware and the people who want to take action will remain and hopefully enact some change here.
Yeah, well said there. All right, so DC, you wanted to weigh in as well.
Yes, in terms of what David was talking about with the digitalization efforts and the fact that customers are doing it. So if you want to be a supplier for that customer, if you want that customer to be your customer, then you have to be up to date with technology and digitalization, and you have to have an IT infrastructure and architecture that is ready to be integrated with whatever that customer is doing. And what we have been seeing, well, I shouldn't say what I've seen a lot of in previous years was the idea that we'll just do whatever digital transformation and digitalization efforts that we're going to implement on our side within the enterprise. And I would always ask, oh, well, what about your suppliers? Or what about your trading partners? Oh, we'll just get a spreadsheet, we'll just get an email. And this disruption has showed us that those days are gone. Yeah. Companies are going to be looking to have systems integrated so that near real time, whatever the cadence is of that data, that they can see their suppliers, third, fourth tier suppliers. That is going to be a really big effort and push over the next couple of years. So suppliers that are not also upgrading their IT infrastructure are going to get left behind. Now, what does that mean? I would like to see larger companies that, David mentioned that are part of, the alliance already, that they will take the time to develop these strategic partnerships and alliances with diverse suppliers and not just write them off, but propose opportunities to do these digital transformation efforts together. So, kind of textbook supply chain strategic alliance is that we share the risk, we share the rewards. So as a customer and as you, my strategic alliance partner, I value you as a diverse partner. I want you to continue to be able to support whatever, my needs are. But if I am on my side going to do a multi-million-dollar, multi-year transformation, if you can't keep up, then I don't want to just write you off. Let's figure out together how I can help you keep up.
Yeah.
So I do think that it's, kind of twofold. So the supplier has to recognize that they're lacking in that infrastructure, and they have to have the willingness to move forward. But the big corporations who are the decision makers to choose which suppliers remain, which suppliers are replaced, which new suppliers come on board, that they will, be patient with those diverse suppliers for the point of what David said, really economic development back into these diverse communities, creating jobs, et cetera.
Right. Yep. Okay. So really quick, Sylvia Judy, going back to Nicole's call-in question, for lack of a better phrase, Sylvia agreed with all the sentiment here. And she says, hey, if the culture is exclusive and not inclusive, move on, their loss. Sylvia also goes on to say that she admires her South Carolina Senator Tim Scott for fostering apprenticeship programs in South Carolina, modeled after the German apprenticeship program. It allows all individuals from the most diverse social economic backgrounds to learn a trade and become an expert in their craft. Creating jobs and manufacturing with a skilled and able workforce is the way to prosperity for all. So good stuff there from Sylvia.
We've seen that firsthand in South Carolina too. Their focus on supply chain and their focus on manufacturing is really, really strong. And it goes all the way to their junior college program, or I forget what else to call those schools, but technical colleges as well, right?
Yep.
And that creates such an inclusive environment by training everyone to have those skills that are put into play in South Carolina.
Yep. Good stuff there. And David, hailing from Columbia, South Carolina, you might want to weigh in really quick on maybe what you've seen in that state.
Well, I think it's important to know that South Carolina has attracted a lot of foreign industry, and the way they've won the battle in terms of getting the BMWs and the Volvos and others is that, going back to Greg's point, they wanted being the training leader in the country for technical jobs, because the Technical College Center there is a model for the rest of the country.
It is.
And so I think we as a country have to step back and look at the value of education again and the value of future jobs. Because if you look at the digitized supply chains, most of these supply chains and the smart factories within those supply chains will be driven by people with technical skills.
Yeah.
So we have to really reassess what competitiveness really means. And to your point, Greg, I think South Carolina has been a thought leader in that vein. And of course, I think it's impacted the way I looked at DEMSCA also, and the future of DEMSCA in terms of leveraging training now to step beyond what we've been doing, and now through the foundation to get corporations to come engage in digital transformation as they themselves struggle with it. Because the big secret out there is a lot of them really don't know what that really means yet. So they're struggling also.
Good point. Okay, and again, to our audience, we've got about 10 minutes or so left of Q&A. Feel free to text your comments in. If you've got a great connection, raise your hand and we can recognize you. Elba Pereira-Gallagher weighs in on this next here. I really wish Elba was here with us. She's very, I love her sharp, passionate commentary. And here Elba says that she disagrees around some of those earlier priorities and focuses. She says if we don't dismantle the institutional bias, things will never trickle down. It's like the concept of trickle-down economics. Look at the economic disparity now. We just fix the institutional biases to enable equal access. So when digitization and more prosperity happens, everyone has an equal shot. Good stuff there from Elba. And Sneha, who was part of our live stream the last couple of weeks, also weighs in here. She's interested to know, how do we audit the bias introduced in AI? As in, how do we keep a check on this? Does any of our panel, Greg, DC, David, want to weigh in on Sneha's question there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll need to have evaluation measures. There are actually people training AI to test for bias in AI. So in the absence of that, you'll have to have effectively a diverse panel who, and this happens, people continue to interact with AI because, look, let's identify AI for what it is. It is a really, really strong computer learning, not decision making, a strong computer learning mechanism. So we need people overseeing that to rationalize and root out those kind of biases. Yep. Even AI needs people.
That's crazy as that sounds, you're right. DC, David, any comments on, no, keep driving. Okay. All right.
What he said.
Another big show.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let me go back to what, Christina shared, that this is a must for companies to analyze. So companies it's really important for them to analyze their supplier data for relationships, accountability, and increases. I guess for their competitiveness is what Christina's sharing. And Christina, you're probably referencing an earlier point in the conversation, and I am a little bit behind you there. All right, so if I can, I want to circle back on something here. All of y'all have touched on this, and DC and David in your not prepared remarks, but your dedicated segments, you both touched on this, and that is you can't just diversity is not enough. That inclusivity, if you're not embracing and making folks, if you're not including everybody, you're still failing. Can you both address that for a minute or two, DC? And let's start with you.
Yeah, definitely. So I would address that in terms of what does that inclusion look like. So I use an experience. So I worked at a company, great company. I love the people there, but I definitely always, it wasn't a conscious thing that they were doing. They weren't trying to exclude me, but every activity that the company did, every kind of happy hour, it all fit around kind of the main groups, what they liked to do, where they liked to go. So it was one of those things to where, all right, well, either you are going to do this activity that we all like, or you're not. There was not this idea of, oh, well, we'll try this, and we'll also have this activity, and we'll also have this activity. So we are providing different opportunities for interaction for other types of employees. I don't want to say types of employees, but other employees that might not want to also do this thing. So what we know is that relationships matter. So it's not enough to just show up to work and do a good job and to be really great at your job. You have to also rub elbows, rub shoulders, interact with, know when so-and-so's birthday is coming up, know when so-and-so's kid is graduating from college. And when do these conversations happen? They happen at these happy hours. They happen at these outside of work events. But if these outside of work events are only, again, themed around things that certain groups enjoy, then you either have to, bite the bullet and spend 2 hours of your time doing something you absolutely hate for the sake of advancing your career, or you don't go and you miss out on the opportunity to know what positions are coming down the pipeline, or to know what projects are coming up so that you can raise your hand and throw your name in the hat before they happen. So I I think of inclusion outside of that. And someone mentioned training. Training is definitely a thing. Project Include has a whole, framework around training for diversity and inclusion. But just from my personal experience, I have always bit the bullet and cringed for the hours that I was there. But that is a very concrete way, and I think it can be a takeaway for companies from this conversation, because it is something that's very subconscious. It is not something that I think people do on purpose. I think it's also sometimes a matter of convenience. What is close to the office, or there's a vote. Okay, well, if there's a vote and 70% of the company looks the same, then what does that do for the other 30%?
Right.
So those kind of outside of work activities, I think, can definitely be improved to be more inclusive.
I love that. I can tell you just from personal experience and just my mindset that what you just shared in the last 5 minutes really fills in a gap. And to your point, it's not an intentional gap. It's just what you're not thinking about, and that unfortunately hurts others and holds them back. So thank you so much for sharing. David, weigh in on really the need to really get it right all the way, not just diversity, but also inclusivity.
Well, let me underscore, DEMSCA is not a supply diversity organization. We are a supply development organization. Works with corporations that have diverse interests. Now, that diverse interest cannot just be in supply diversity and generating spend. That's great. That means the firms are getting work. The bigger question is the sustainability of that spend in a fast-moving supply chain. We're getting ready to go into 5G. Supply chains are digitizing. Supply chains are moving faster and faster and faster. Suppliers have got to be faster than the fastest in order to survive. So if spend is the objective, it doesn't work in the long term. It might give the corporations kudos and accolades and a big banquet and a plaque at one event. But the question is, are those suppliers on whose backs you got those recognitions, are they still in the supply chain? Can they grow spend? Are they be able to sustain their presence in supply chains and help other suppliers in the process? So my measure of supply diversity success is a little different than that of corporate America, because so many of them are looking for one-off successes, one big event, one recognition for being for spending dollars. But the real crux of the issue here is, what are you doing to help develop those suppliers? Are you committing your time and resource? Because supply development is change management. Change management is hard. DEMSCA is an organization that has both corporate members and supplier members for a reason. That reason is they both have to go through a change management experience to really understand the value of what we're doing. And that change has to take place from the top of the corporation's value chain and the suppliers. And we have to bring that together through a strategic relationship that can last forever.
Well put. And I hear screaming in those comments there, David. I hear it screaming in my ears. It's got to be sustainable. We got to gain and then build on those gains. Greg.
Economic sustainability it's something, I mean, you hate to confess it, but it's something that you have to acknowledge. If we want any kind of change to happen, it has to be economically sustainable, right?
Yep.
Right.
I mean, we've just seen it over and over and over again.
Agreed. All right, so I got about 1:15 our time. We're going to kind of start to move into the final phase here. I hate to do it because there's some comments and some questions we couldn't get to. There's a lot more we could learn and talk with both DC and David and Greg, but we want to protect everybody's time. DC, before we wrap up here, we're going to hear a few comments from Kevin Jackson in a second. But DC, how can folks connect with you? And then I'm going to ask you the same question, David.
Yes, the easiest way to connect with me is definitely on LinkedIn, DCDYCI, and Mans is easier than Spregola, MANNS, and I'm sure I'm the only one, and Spregola you will also see. Shoot me a message, connect with me, follow me, whatever you're comfortable with, and I look forward to connecting with you.
Outstanding. Thanks so much for your time. Don't go anywhere just yet, but thanks so much. Really have enjoyed this conversation. And David, same question for you, sir. How can folks connect with you and DMSCA?
Of course, D. Burton at dmsca.us, D. Burton at dmsca.us, or on LinkedIn. I will respond expeditiously. And those are the best two ways to connect with me.
Outstanding. And y'all have got some upcoming events that folks can learn a lot more about at dmsca.us. DC and David, thanks so much. Really have enjoyed it. Greg, I'll tell you, before we bring Kevin L. Jackson on, quick commentary from your quick hot take.
It's going to be hot. I got to tell you, DC was too kind to say it, but what she said is a lot of the activities and a lot of the initiatives in companies are too white, right? And they don't consider in anyone else. And it is, I believe, as DC said, it's an oversight, not an intention. I'd love for us to have the discussion at some point about how far we have progressed from, David, probably when you were coming in the work world, where exclusion was intentional, right? And now I'm hopeful, and I'm just hopeful that the ills that we have today are based on negligence, not intent at the very worst, because that's so much easier to overcome. I feel it. I feel like it's true. I know that in organizations I've worked with or I've run, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, we are intentional about being inclusive. I'd love to give anybody who is a white leader any kind of guidance that you would like to have on how to be actively inclusive. And you know, the other is, and David just said it, and that is that the economics have to make sense, and you have to see that it makes economic sense for your company, for you personally. I do a lot of recruiting for philanthropies, and I don't care why you give, just give. Eventually your heart will turn the right direction if you give. And I think that is true for organizations. If you give and you include and you do it the right way, not just checking the box, not just managing statistics, but you do it the right way, then eventually you will see the light. And that's what we need to have happen.
Excellent point to finish up on. Big thanks again before we turn over and start to wrap up. Big thanks to DC Mans Spregola and David Burton. Really an honor to have you both share, and we look forward to reconnecting with both of you very soon.
Right.
All right. What a conversation. And to our audience, really enjoyed. God, we have got such an incredibly talented audience and group of participants in these types of events. And I really wish we could get to all of them. We're going to have to break down and have a full day webinar or show at some point to get to everybody, because there were a lot of good questions and comments we couldn't get to. But as we wrap up here, Greg, we enjoyed earlier this week having Kevin L. Jackson join us for a few minutes on the Supply Chain Buzz, which takes place every Monday via live stream. And he and the Source Connect team, which are supporting today's event, they're doing some really innovative things. And I'm hoping that Kevin L. Jackson is still kind of in the green room here on our virtual studio. If he is, Kevin, can you join us? There we go.
There he is.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you doing?
Oh, I am doing awesome. I'll tell you, that was a great session. I learned a lot from the viewpoint, and especially your audience.
Yeah, agreed. We did too. I've got, again, the proverbial 17 pages of notes, I think, today, and that's okay. That was my selfish intent coming in, because I wanted to soak it up. But Kevin, as we start to wrap up today's session, again, Greg and I and the whole Supply Chain Now team appreciates you and Source Connect support. If you could just take a minute or two, tell us more about Source Connect and how folks can plug in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Source Connect is an online B2B marketplace that digitizes the discovery and engagement between global scale enterprise buyers and thoroughly vetted diverse suppliers. So we accomplish this by curating and building a global ecosystem of trusted business entities. You know, trust is really based on data. Companies do business with companies that they know and that they have built trust with. But in today's world, everything is virtual, and we're not used to building trust through these advanced technologies. We're used to being in the room with the people we want to do business with. So now we have to rely on data, and we provide data that has been verified by independent third parties, and this data is stored in the Trust Your Supplier blockchain-enabled information repository. And before we go, I want to say, we are very proud to sponsor this conversation about race and industry. But our society gains future value only if we take action and we drive this conversation forward towards collaboration and cross-industry action. So I would like to also express our gratitude to Supply Chain Now for partnering with Source Connect as our media partner. Hey, they will also be joining us during the National Virtual Small Business Expo on August 4th and 5th. That event is presented by AT&T Business, and it features CNBC as its media partner. So please visit Source Connect online at sourceconnect.com, or you can reach directly to me on LinkedIn or via email at kevin@kevinljackson.com. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Kevin.
The Kevin L. Jackson, as he signed off on Monday. Google him. He's everywhere. Really. Kidding aside, Kevin, really appreciate your leadership. I love the innovative things you're doing over at Source Connect. We look forward to next steps as we work together. And again, appreciate all of your support for helping us make this conversation, helping us really facilitate an uncomfortable conversation for many folks. But that's the only way, to your point, we can make progress and take action, that cross-industry action that is so critical. So thanks so much, Kevin.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Greg, goodness gracious, it's only Wednesday. It feels like Sunday evening, just about, right, after the week we've had thus far. But we've got to push, before we went on earlier today, I kind of use this analogy that probably not a lot of folks could relate to unless you've ever warned them. But in the Air Force, back in tech school students would do a lot of stuff, including cut the grass around the dormitories. And we would, because you have to take every single safety precaution that's in all the regs in the military, we'd wear these metal shoes that fit over our boots. So if you're clumsy like me, naturally, you try to walk around in these clodhoppers is what they're called, and you can't do anything gracefully. And as we were kind of prep, or at least as I was prepping for this conversation, I had to embrace that in my own way, it's going to be really clunky to try to get around and hopefully help facilitate the conversation that we want to help with. I won't have all the right things to say at the right time, but we're going to take our best hack at it. And that's kind of what, just on my end, what today felt like. So I felt like a very productive conversation. Again, I learned a lot of things, especially what David and DC shared and some of these comments from the audience. Just what I expected. Some of my blind spots that, to your point, aren't intentional, but we've got to change those things too. What was some of your, before we wrap up here, some of your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think our panelists were remarkably gracious. I mean, DC acknowledged that everybody has those blind spots, even though that's not the topic of this conversation. But I think it is important for everyone to acknowledge that you have a distinct point of view, you have a perspective, you have prejudices and biases. It's just a fact. As she said, it's just part of human nature to have an affinity for people who are like you. And that's okay. It's okay to have that. But in addition, you have to have the openness, the maturity to recognize that people who aren't like you are very valuable too. You know, one of my co-founders of Blue Ridge was Black. He's the only remaining of the founders at the company now. And the perspective that we got from him, and the perspective and the value that he brought, it wasn't intentional. He was our friend. We recognized his value, and he was part of the founding team. I mean, he wasn't the Black guy on the founding team, but you have to acknowledge, and if you're not in the position to have those kind of relationships, reach out and create those kind of relationships. We're talking about this on Tequila Sunrise, inclusive investing. If you think the numbers are bad in corporate America generally, look at in the investing environment.
It can get worse.
Even worse. Even worse. And it's not intentional. It's just you hang with who you know, right? But now what I see, and this is an initiative that I've seen in the investment world, is they are intentionally going out and trying to expand the investors are trying to expand their network to include people that don't look like them. And I think that's a fantastic initiative. And as David and Kevin have said, we have to have action, not just words. As you say all the time, deeds over words.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, we're trying to do just that with what we can give and what we can give from, and we're going to have a lot more of these types of conversations via this, you know, stand up and sound off, or via a lot of our other aspects of our platform. So I'm glad you added that wrinkle when it comes to inclusive investing, because I can tell you that's a blind spot for me, and it's good that you're evangelizing some of those opportunities in that portion of the business world. So Greg, thanks so much for co-hosting this session with me. Big thanks again to our panelists, DC Mans Sfragala, my apologies, and David Burton, and of course Kevin L. Jackson. Best wishes to Tandria Bellamy. We're going to catch you next time. All the best to your son as he starts his collegiate journey. And to our audience, as I scroll down and look at the folks that could make it today, there's so many people I wish we could reach out and set up a cup of coffee or lunch with. Thanks so much for joining us. Y'all delivered, as always. The audience delivered, and we couldn't even get to everything. So on that note, we wish you all the best. We challenge our audience just like we challenge ourselves. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. Take that action that you heard from DC and David and Kevin and all the comments. Hey, take that action, and we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.